Hi, this is Professor Terrance Coffie, founder of the Social Justice Network and adjunct lecturer at New York University. We are here at DCTV Firehouse Theater in Manhattan for the premiere of The First Step. This documentary focuses on the coalition of Van Jones and so many other leaders from across the country for the bipartisan support for the passage of the First Step Act. This legislation has been one of the most provocative and moving pieces of legislation in the past 30 years. I would like to introduce Mazaratti White, one of the creators of this documentary. We spoke earlier, and I first also want to thank DCTV as well, each of you who are here tonight, and my team at the Social Justice Network. Compelling. As I was looking at this, I was part of an organization during that period of time that was invited to the White House, and as it was suggested or shared, that there were coalitions and groups that did not want to participate in this advocacy with that administration at that time. Mazaratti, you were an intricate part in the development of this documentary that took you into spaces with C-SPAN, CPAC, a lot of people that some of those of us in this work feel that we're on the opposite side. Tell us a little about you first, and then how was that transition, that process for you as you work with the Kramer brothers on this?
Thank you, Terrance. Good evening, everybody. First, on behalf of Meridian Hill Pictures, we just thank you all for coming out and showing support for this film. This was really a labor of love for the Kramer brothers and our whole entire production crew. A little backstory about me. Mazaratti White. I'm a film producer, mostly based in documentary film. This was my first feature film with the Kramer brothers, so I was grateful for this experience. Originally, I'm from Texas, and I found my way in DC back in 2010, and I packed a bag just on faith and sold everything in my apartment and lied to my parents, and I was living in a hotel room. I decided to go to film school after studying political science and music in Texas, and I felt a deeper calling specifically for filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, so I got a job in accounting and worked my way through school. And one day I was working in accounting, and I called out Meridian Hill Pictures, and Lance picked up the phone. He's our main producer for this film, and I just poured my heart out to him and explained like what I was trying to do with life and film, and he took time out of his day that day and really poured into me. And I was always admired by the Kramer brothers and their work, the grassroots work and the filmmaking that they were doing at the time. Fast forward, our paths hadn't crossed yet. I didn't work with them at all, no internship or anything. I had gotten into the industry and moved to New York. I was in Harlem back in 2017, and I get a random phone call from a producer. Said, "Hey, we got your name from someone that you worked with on a different project. You referred to us. We're working on this film about criminal justice reform. This Meridian Hill Pictures." And I was like, "Wait, who is this?" So it was that's just a little funny story how our paths, crossed again. Preparation meets opportunity. And they told me that it was with Van Jones, and I had a funny story about Van. Again, in one of my little hustle moments, I was in Baltimore at a Prince concert, trying to sneak backstage to film, and I ran into Van Jones, and he was like questioning me on my Prince knowledge. And fun fact, people don't know that him and Prince were really close friends, the best of friends actually, which was one of his inspirations for this film actually. And again, that was in 2015, 2014. So a few years later, I get the call, and again, our paths crossed, and I got onto the project. For me, it was personal because I have seen the effects of criminal justice in my family and with my peers, and so it was vital for me to be a part of this. I wanted to be a part of something that was telling an honest story, that wasn't slanted, one way or the other, that really spoke to the heart of what was going on at the time. This is 2016. At the turn of the election, Van and the Kramer brothers had already had an established relationship. They had developed and produced a mini-series called The Messy Truth for Van. It was a docu-series, pretty similar to the footwork of what you saw with the LA and the West Virginia group here, where Van would travel and sit down with people from middle America, all across America, and have those hard conversations leading up to the 2016 election. So in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of fear in the country. It was a polarizing time. There was a lot of division, to say the least. And so they had a conversation with themselves and said, well, we have to do something about this. What do we want to do? They spoke with Van. Van said that he, wanted to use this election as an opportunity to try to do something substantial in terms of criminal justice reform. And whereas everyone else saw gloom and gloom, Van saw an opportunity to take advantage and work with the Trump administration to try to do something that hadn't been done before. So,
during the filming of this, we talked earlier, and as far as particularly with the bipartisan aspect and the polarization that was taking place, particularly under the Trump administration, during this, what do you feel was one of the most difficult aspects of not only that particular era of time, but your role in this as an African American, understanding some of the concerns that communities had across the country, along with advocates, and working with this administration and working with Van on this project?
Sure. Well, personally, I think, in agreement with the Kramer brothers and our direction of this film, we wanted to use it as a template, for community building, for bridge building, Personally, it was intriguing. I did a lot of the DC and the New York City shoots that you saw with Van, in the halls of Congress, and, really putting foot to pavement, trying to meet with the representatives and getting a lot of no's. There were so many no's, and there were a lot of times when we really didn't know what direction this film was going to go in, because at the beginning there was no bill, there was no Jared Kushner relationship, there was no First Step Act, there was nothing. So it was literally building it from the ground up, and we just wanted to tell an honest story, no matter where the cards landed, So it was interesting, especially when Van felt under attack a lot of those times, how he processed those moments. Our position was to be a fly on the wall. And, but me personally, as a black man, I could empathize with him a lot. And I wanted to just see how he processed some of those hard criticisms. And
that was from the left and
the left and the right, exactly. So, we were reaching for an empathetic viewpoint, especially for those who did not agree with him. Specifically, you saw Patrice, one of the co-founders for the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
She was featured in the film, although she wasn't a main character. But we really spent a lot of time with her and Van to really get an understanding of, what her viewpoint was and why she opposed the bill. She was not, she was unapologetic and letting Van know, like, hey, I am not against this. I am against this completely, but I want to see how it works out for you. But these are the reasons why I'm against it. And just having to look at him and see how he processed that. He really took time to listen and hear and try to understand. And then he would seek counsel, to make sure that he was understanding both sides, specifically from his side, the progressive side. So there was a very interesting experience for me.
I think that what's at the forefront for me, as we look at the country today, we see we're in a real progressive state of decarceration. We see more legislation that's actually coming from Cory Booker's office. I think it's the Second Look Act that's in place. And in discussing Senator Booker, who initially felt that he would not support this legislation, did you feel that that was a setback for the work that you guys were doing in interviewing the senator at that time?
Not at all. I think that specifically for Van, I think he needed that pushback. I think and in any movement, it's never going to be easy, right? Especially when you're one leading the charge. Someone has to be born for the mission. And for Van, he felt like this was his calling. So he knew the adversity that he was facing. And you also, the film showcases, that he was going through a lot personally at the same exact time. So it's like, how do you, consult your heart, but have a listening ear, and try to process that without coming off as aggressive or, not listening or understanding. So no, I don't. I think it was needed. It was vital. And as you can see later on, one of the representatives, how she spoke specifically about how she changed her mind. But without those pushbacks, maybe there wouldn't have been any negotiations. Maybe it just would have been the first step back without any type of sentencing reform, which is a lot of the concern that people had was this isn't really criminal justice reform. This is just some baby,
Yeah. Well, I was probably one of those boys.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, and so those concerns were not unwarranted. They were. That's why that pushback was needed, and that's how you make compromise. That's how it's baby steps. So okay, it's the first step back today, but obviously the work is not done. Yeah.
And I think that takes me back to his strategy that goes back to Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, because we always held the Civil Rights Act of 1965, but we never recognized the Civil Rights Act of 1959 that opened the door. Although some people say that from 59, I think a 10-year, whatever window that was for the next step forward. And I want to align with that, with what you're seeing today, the impact of that legislation, and now getting the backstory through the documentary. What do you envision the future of reform in America, particularly when we think about coalition building, and that coalition building not being so squarely just on the left, but crossing party lines, crossing racial or ethnic lines in these new conversations?
I think like what we saw with the LA and the West Virginia group here, we need more of that. We need more community building, coalition, bridge building, and conversations, those hard conversations. We might not be able to change a person's political stance or viewpoint, but maybe there can be a better understanding of where the other person is coming from, so that you can understand them a lot better. What's not shown on the film is there's a moment where Lewis and Van and the team is like stomping the pavement, when I think it shows one moment where the bill, it seems like it's dead, Trump changed his mind. What's not shown is like that happened like 5 or 6 times, so there were like many moments where everyone was like, this is over, let's pack it up, let's go home. But they kept stomping the pavement, they kept having those conversations, specifically Van. And there was a moment where after the team sat down with the representatives from West Virginia and California, or one of the representatives, said, you know what, I changed my conservative representative at that. He's like, I changed my mind on this. And he like literally takes out, like, people, for me, it was like watching, I'm Just a Bill, you remember that back in the day? Yeah. So it was like they take out all of these documents and it's like red markers and things like that. So to see that process up front was eye-opening. And I'm like, oh, this is literally playing out in front of us right now. And to have that impact of not giving up and having those conversations, and to have those two groups there, that's what actually changed that representative's mind. So we need more of that. But also, so most prisoners today are incarcerated on a state level.
Right.
So,
right.
And this impacts, the federal level, right? So we need to have those conversations on a local and state level, having those conversations with our local elected officials, because that's where the progress is made, step by step. Like, what first step can I take here, on a local level in my community, so that, when pen comes to paper, there's actual change being made, that people can feel,
Yeah, and in my work, as I said, being a adjunct lecturer, one of my courses is forensic justice and problem solving course. And when we talk, and my advocacy that I do locally, statewide, and federal, a lot of that aims at, particularly when we think about the federal prison and we talk about that 2.2 million people in our country, most people do not know that the federal prisons only account for 200,000 people, and that leaves us 2 point whatever million more to deal with, and that's really came from the '94 crime bill being adopted by states with the 85% guideline or mandate that was instituted that expanded our criminal legal system and expanded and created what we now know as mass incarceration. I think you just hinted at it. As we kind of move forward, is there a lesson that we can learn at the state level that what Van has done at the federal level to implicate this and create change in the work that's being done today?
I think so. For instance, there's a lot of talk in Pennsylvania happening now on the state level for probation and parole reform, which plagues a lot of people. I have a personal connection to that just recently, and it's through the work that I've done with this film that I was able to help a loved one navigate that system in Texas. And it just really opened my eyes up more to say that there's so much more work that we have to do, but films like this, screening them, we've seen a lot of responses from these screenings across the country, especially in like rural America, to where you'd be surprised a lot of people haven't even heard of the First Step Act. So that's the other part about it, education. Like even educating our elected officials of what the First Step Act is, so that that they can adjust accordingly to the law, and so that people can be freed. So we're seeing examples like that in Pennsylvania. We're seeing on the state level in Mississippi. There's talks for life sentences. They're trying to reform that now. As a result of the First Step Act. So it's trickling down.
And I think this is, for a lot of advocates, even as we saw people being released, we saw people talking, and we think about the various parties. Do you think that, and it's important that we say this, do you think that we're going to continue to talk about the criminal legal system through a racial lens, or when we talk about crack cocaine versus today's opioid crisis, do you think that we could find a space where we can look at the human component?
Yeah. I love the moment in the film, the young lady Tyler. She identifies as Black and queer, and she has that moment with Dave, the county official.
Yes.
And she speaks directly to him, and when he says, basically was expressing that he hasn't changed his viewpoint. And so she's like, well, I feel that our views align, but especially when it speaks to my people who have done the work continuously over the decades, so we have to be able to find a common ground, but we also have to be able to call it out for what it is. And when we can find the common ground, especially when there's common pain, we can find common purpose. And when we can find common purpose, maybe we can find some way to work on a common project, such as the First Step Act, but also not neglecting the fact of the history of this country and what it's done specifically for people of color and directly for Black people. We have to call it out for what it is. And it's just the truth.
And one last question, because I do want to allow a few questions from the audience. Have a few of my students that are here, so it's great to see that. In line with what you just described, how impactful do you think coalition work is in creating change, as opposed to the, I guess, what's the statement, all or nothing approach? Right. Do you think, because I'm a formerly incarcerated citizen. So I think, as Lewis described in the documentary, or one of the gentlemen expressed, wait a minute, I'm behind bars. And it's as if I can get out 6 months or 1 year earlier than, I would normally, that is progress to me. When does the efforts of reform get politicized by the left? That are they more concerned about their political agenda or the actual people that would benefit from the efforts such as that Van took?
I think that's something that each person specifically has to consult within their own heart of like what their agenda is. But from the process of this filmmaking, the process of talking to people like yourself and Lewis and hearing these stories of people coming home, like honestly, that's what matters. When you talk to someone who is facing 20 years to life and they're not asking questions of, well, who's the president? Okay, now who's the governor of this state?
Who's the senator?
Who's the senator? Like they're not asking those questions. If I can go home, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's where the focus has to remain of like, what is the end result? And then for the people on the front lines like Van and Lewis and et cetera and team, they have to ask themselves, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Because everything comes with a price. So yes, Van was able to see tens of thousands of people come home, but it cost, his reputation to some degree with his people on the left and the progressives or whatever. The gentleman from West Virginia, yes, he took the meeting with then Senator Kamala Harris, but it also cost him his race. So
back in West Virginia,
with a black woman. Yeah. So you have to consult your heart, but I believe that it's definitely worth it. There's many more first steps to take. Obviously, the job is not done, but someone mentioned it on the team. They call it confetti moments. If it can help one person, it was worth it. Wow.